To kick off the event, I would like to invite our President, Professor Raghuveer Pai, to deliver the welcome address.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and mid-morning, good afternoon to people in India. I think people from Sweden have told me they're going to join. Good morning, Martin, and all of
Good
you.
morning.
This is our seventh monthly webinar this year. And we've had excellent webinars and we put it on YouTube. So this one also will go on YouTube certainly. And very interesting topic relevant to India. And Martin has worked here before in India in Kolkata. So we're going to have a first-hand experience from Martin today. And welcome, Martin, for this morning's or this afternoon's webinar.
Thank you.
And welcome to all of you, members of AMSI. Anne Gibbs was the CEO of Asset Management Council Australia. Gopi Chattopadhyay was the chair of International Advisory Committee of Asset Management Society India. Colonel Sunil Yadav, who is the chair of the Technical Committee of Asset Management Society India. Dr. Binu, who is the treasurer of Asset Management Society India. And we have other participants from across India. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the Master of Ceremonies as well. So I won't take long, and welcome again to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to commence now or?
Ramya?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
I think
I'll take over from here. So I'll briefly introduce today's speaker. So greetings, everyone. Welcome to this Asset Management Society India's webinar series 2024. Today, we are delighted to have with us a distinguished expert in the field of asset management and change leadership, Professor Martin Kerr. Martin Kerr is the Managing Director of Structural Change and Applying Asset Management and a leading figure in asset management globally. With over 30 years of extensive industry experience, Martin's career has spanned various roles, including CEO, Managing Director, Program Director, and General Manager, among others. His expertise covers a wide range of sectors, including private, public, government, not-for-profit, and defense. Martin is a certified fellow in asset management, a certified asset management assessor, and a certified practicing project director. His commitment to placing clients' value ahead of revenue has earned him the trust and respect of numerous organizations worldwide. In today's webinar, titled Applying Asset Management to Support a Joint Venture in India, Martin will share insights from a joint venture between an Australian and Indian company in Kolkata. Martin has recently served as the ISO convener for ISO 55001-2024 and currently holds the position of Technical Director for the World Partners in Asset Management, where he contributes to the CAMA and Global Certification Scheme. Please join me in welcoming Professor Martin Kerr.
Sunil, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, you go.
So let's make this make the most of this seminar by actively participating and engaging with Martin's wealth of knowledge. Without further ado, I hand over the control to Professor Martin Kerr. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunil, and thank you very much, Professor Pai. It is a real privilege and honor to be able to share with you today a bit of this story about a real-world experience. I first thought of, I've never presented this before. The reason I wanted to present it was after speaking to Professor Gopi and realizing that we both had a connection to Kolkata. Of course, he was born and around that area. But I just wanted to share with you, when I look back at something that occurred back in between 2010 and 2013, I actually applied some of these asset management models to this project, and I'll share with you a bit of a story there behind the scenes. So the project background, as you can see there, I went to ChatGPT and asked it to draw me a picture. And what you see there is not too far distance to what it actually looked like at the end. We had an Australian company, they're an ASX 200 company, who were used to creating passenger cars, locomotives, and wagons. And they joined in with a company over in Kolkata and formed a joint venture. And the joint venture was a starting point to build smaller components into to be able to send by freight into Australia, and then Australia would actually then assemble them and it would go around the world. So here's a story. A bit of the context, and for those that know asset management or any asset management system, it's important to understand the context. And as you can see here, I've already said there, the manufacturing of rolling stock componentry. We had to supply and set up specialist equipment, which I'll talk about throughout this morning. Some of the complications and the context, because it was a joint venture between Australia and India, there were 3 different balance sheets, so 3 sets of books, which kind of made it complicated. And as well as setting up the factory, we had 5 different currencies in which we had to report into. And as you can see, the US dollar, rupee, Australian dollar, the euro, and of course the Singaporean dollar. The head office of this joint venture used to report into Singapore to keep it neutral ground, which had a lot of regulatory requirements. A major component of the transferring a lot of what we did in Australia over to India was what we called tech transfer or technical transfer. I also was responsible, as in the role of program director, to actually go down and recruit. And I work with an Indian company. I spent much of my time in Shakespeare Avenue down there in Kolkata working with the recruitment arm to try to work out how we attract the right staff. There was a lot of traveling, of course, between Australia and India, as you can understand. Very new concept to both the Australian company that I was working or representing, and of course in India, was around whole of life cycle management and costing, but also to around benefit realization. We also had a real challenge because Australians have a way of doing things, Indians have a way of doing things. So how the business was going to support this joint venture was still yet to be understood. And then finally, as you may all, those old enough to remember, in 2008, there was the global financial crisis, which also started to look at, well, will the world still need these components moving forward? So that's the context setting the scene. The challenges that it presented itself when I walked in to run this program in the middle of 2010, I've mentioned the global financial crisis, but there was a serious immediate decline in sales. The civil works also had to be redone. There was an misestimate on the weight of the machinery going into the factory. There was something 30 cranes, overhead gantry and semi-gantry cranes, so that we had to do a lot of civil rework. And as I know at the moment at this time of year, you can get monsoons, etc. So that was also a challenge. We also had a challenge because of the decline in sales. Upper management or the executive decided that they wanted to change the production line requirements halfway through the build of the factory. That created a lot of noise and a lot of rework for us. And to add to that, we were asked to have a return of profit within 24 months. So that's what I walked into. Another key element, and this comes back to the leadership and cultural piece, is, of course, from an Australian point of view, I was asking them to transfer their knowledge into a factory in India, which would ultimately lead in a loss of employment for many of them. So that was quite a challenge for me, a very big challenge. The change of production lines meant we also had to change freight requirements. And in doing so, we had issues like going from a 20-foot container to a 40-foot container. And that had a lot of issues in logistics of getting those freight to the wharf in the Bay of Bengal. Also during the project, apart from all that, transfer pricing laws were tightened so that any expat organization working in India had to actually abide by the transfer police. And of course, that led to a few changes. Also led to a little bit of tension between the joint venture partners. So I felt that I used to sit between the two entities and sometimes arbitrate. And of course, walking into this, asset management was seen as very new. So that's the context and background to where we're starting. I'm not going to tell you exactly who the organizations were. You might be able to work it out in another way, but it was classed as a brownfield site. So when I say that, there was existing infrastructure there. It was next to a foundry. The organization itself in India had a long history of automation and machinery, but it was very lightweight. It wasn't heavy. We were looking at putting machines in there. One of them was 25 ton. We had overhead cranes, etc. So the roof had to be adjusted, had to understand the monsoon impacts, but also too, the floor of the factory had to be strong enough to support the weight of the equipment, but also the delicate new things like 6-axis laser cutting machinery, which was it couldn't have vibration. So there was a lot of civil works and mechanical and structural engineering to be done. When I walked into the program, like many things, there's the need to make money. There's a big program, a project. But what I found after going my first 3 or 4 visits, I couldn't get alignment between the executive of the Indian company, the executive of the Australian company. So what I did was I said, well, I'm going to draw on the board a whole visualization of how to get from point A all the way through to the end of the project. And the starting point, of course, was the business case. So I worked with all stakeholders. We took the business case and worked out what were the logical steps to move across to the full-blown production. And when we talk about full production, that means everything's working, all logistics are in place, and we even had things like SAP. So for each of those little icons and images you can see represented an outcome, and each of those outcomes had a set of criteria that I had the board of directors sign off to. So that helped us understand exactly what needed to be achieved, but also in what sequence did it need to be achieved. Because as you can imagine, when they're trying to get profit within 24 months, they keep saying, well, where's the production? I could use this image here to actually point to the fact that you can't go and jump a step. You've got to do this sequentially. So that really helped me in the early stages, at least get alignment between the executive, but also to the workers, because a lot of the management there in Kolkata, they were residents of Kolkata. So I was also trying to help them protect them regarding, what was the right word, an expectation on them that it also relied on the Australians to help them. It wasn't just them, because they were often at the front line in many of the commercial discussions. We worked with the team and my friend Rajet, who I still keep in contact with over there in West Bengal. He and I came up with some guiding principles. And what we did was the first one was, if we're going to get to full rate of production, let's start there, work backwards and understand again how to create that value map. For each milestone, as I've already mentioned, success criteria would be signed off by the workers, but also by the executive. And that took at least 6 months or 9 months to get right, but that was the leadership component. For each milestone you saw on that map, we actually came up with a traffic light reporting system. Of course, green means everything's okay. Red means it's not okay and we don't know how to recover it. And amber meant that we might be slipping, but we know what to do to get back on track. So that was the assurance piece. And because this happened between 2010 and really completed about the early 2014, ISO 55001 was not yet available. So I used a lot of PAS 55, some of the 5 management areas, and I think it was about 25 key points to actually underpin the program, so the alignment. And for those of you who know the 2014 version of ISO 55000, you'll know that those 4 principles are the fundamentals back then. I'm also introduced back then what we call in the Asset Management Council the concept model, which very much has that basis around plan, do, check and act. But as you can see, very much the concept of capabilities is in there. That was probably the biggest turning point for me as a program manager and for the joint venture, because when people understood that capabilities was all the assets, the physical assets, the non-physical assets, the people, processes, the technical transfer, the data, the budget, created the capability to deliver the outcomes, that's when it all changed and it started to improve. Because of course the Australians were looking at profitability, Indians were looking at the outcomes. This was my opportunity to connect everything together. And I do remember the board meeting that we finally got there and everyone was aligned. Now, a key part of this presentation I'm going to walk you through is a model called the capability delivery model. And as you can see there in the center, capability, if you Google it, really says the ability to do something. So it really is the assets, all types of assets that enable us to do that. I've already mentioned there the physical and non-physical assets working together, because I was trying to explain back in the day to the executive, you can have all the physical assets in the world, they can all be sitting there, but unless there's processes, data, people, knowledge, insight around them, they will not add any value. But ultimately, at the end of the day, capability allows us to produce an outcome for the joint venture and, of course, the joint venture stakeholders. So I'm going to walk through this capability delivery model piece by piece and just share with you a little bit of insight about what happened and how I believe it certainly improved the project and got us to a point of completion. Without it, I don't think it would have happened. The first part is on this particular model is really understanding what is the need, analysing that. Well, that's pretty easy in the first instance because we refer to the business case. Understanding why we're doing this, what is the need, and of course, there are products to be manufactured for rolling stock. Straightforward. Next part of this process, we start to come and say, well, if that's the need, how do you quantify that? Remember, going into the business case, we had a certain target, but of course now sales had actually reduced, so that then determined the forecast of the products required. So as we're starting to now plan out the factory, the layout, the machinery, etc., how it was going to work, we had the base products, but we also had the quantity, which enabled us then to actually consider what sequence will we start to roll out the production line. From there, we ask the question, especially like we should always do in asset management, do I need an asset to do the work, or can I get away with a non-asset solution? So part of my solution back then was there was an adjacent factory about 3 kilometers away from this factory. And while we were creating it, we had all the production engineers together, both sides of both the Australians and Indians, and we worked out if we could do some of the initial plasma cutting up the road, not laser cutting, we could leave the laser machine till the end and actually accelerate some of the production. And that's why we talk about asset versus non-asset solution, because whether you have an asset or you bring in a service or outsource to do it, that's up to the organization. From there, understanding and quantifying the why and looking at the equipment at a high level in the production line, we then move on to the concept. And we call it concept exploration, which, as the name suggests, how might we actually do this? Of course, we started to look at laser cutters, CNC mills, we had plasma cutters, we had lathes, we had a lot of different machinery. And of course, when you are introducing a laser cutter anywhere in the world, you actually have to understand, well, can I support it? Is it something new? What are all the things needed? And in saying that, after you get through concept exploration, we had laid out the factory line, we had actually determined the types of machinery, we then moved into validating those concepts. And as you can see there, we needed to validate the laser cutter and the CNCs first and foremost. Will they work for the joint venture? Because it's one thing to go out and invest, and these machines were together back then were close to $1 million each. We had to make sure that they would serve the products in which we were designing for, but we also needed to make sure that they would work into the future should we modify the product need. So that was a big piece. So from concept validation in this model here, we then move into really back to the specifying. We are specifying the outcome here, and that might be standards, regulatory, what is the throughput, what is the makeup of the organization, what does it need to do to be successful? And that's where we talk about both functional and non-functional specifications. But ultimately, as you can see there, what do we need to produce the outcome? So once that was agreed the first time, and it had changed a few times, but when it was agreed the first time, we had agreed on the production line, what the products were, how it was going to work, what the throughput was, to what standard it would be, and of course, how to get them back to Australia or one of our other customers over in Pennsylvania in the United States. From the specification, after agreeing with that, we then move into the design. How we design the capabilities to produce those production lines, those required outcomes. Design isn't just around the physical asset. It's not just around the civil works. We are designing the solution, the overarching organization, and all the processes to support it. And this was probably a turning point for the joint venture, because when they realize you're not just doing civil work, you're not just doing equipment, you're looking at a system, and that system had to produce the outcome of those subcomponents. Now, another insight here when we were doing the design was, of course, how do you actually support it? If you were introducing a machine of, say, high tolerance, high importance and criticality with various rates of reliability, you will need to be able to support it. Can we get spare parts? Is there someone in Asia and in particular India that can support it if it should break down? How do we actually support our people? How do we support the training of the people? How do we actually procure consumables? Also, how do we actually then refine the supply chain? Because I remember when the support analysis, it was one thing to actually specify a grade of steel. And I remember a lot of it was S1020 mild steel. We had to make sure that we could actually source it in India. And of course, how do you support that? Because you can make steel in different ways. I won't go there, but depending on how it's welded, that's really important. Support analysis also considered how many shifts would be open on a given full production run. Is it 3 shifts per day, 2 shifts per day? Part of the support analysis, of course, in working in India, typically Saturday is a working day, Monday is not. And then, of course, I had to work out, well, how do we support the back functions back in Australia? One of the support analysis was also Australia decided that they would roll out SAP to support the production line, but they wanted to have it connected to the Australian version of SAP, which brought in all considerations, especially around bandwidth, Wi-Fi, etc. Because 10 years ago, it wasn't as strong as it is now. So from there, understanding how we will support the different areas of the production line, we then move into, well, let's go and source it. Let's go and find out where we can get the machinery. I remember very impressed with the Indian negotiation skills. We got so many discounts on the different pieces of equipment, and that included as well as extended warranties, spare parts, and of course making sure that we had really strong back-to-back commercials with the contract and of course our business case. We started to actually procure machinery, the people, the computers, etc. But because it was a brownfield site, we also had to dispose of assets that weren't required. Another element that was really important that we didn't understand when we went into this joint venture, because it was a rail manufacturing site and one of the joint venture partners was an Australian company, we were subjected to the rail safety national legislation. So that introduced another degree of complexity. From creating and disposing and buying in and sometimes building jigs and fixtures, etc., the next part of this process really looks at what do you do in terms of integrated support? All this is really saying is everything that you considered in your support analysis, you have now implemented. And that includes everything from, as you can see, warranties, spares, commercials. But one of the biggest things that I used to argue with the board was I need money to be able to support overheads for when things go wrong, because we don't have time to go back to the board and ask for money. So budget is an important perspective of your integrated support. In the integrated support too, that was very much when the technical team from Australia came across and was teaching the team how to do things. And I was really pleased and proud that 4 Indians came across to not far from where I live, and they actually were put up for 3 months, and they learned a lot of the techniques and the skills, which of course I remain friends with them today, and they did a fantastic job. So after integrated support, we've got the support in place, we've got the machines ready to go. We're doing a first off production test. We then move into, of course, operations. And here in operations, everything's ready to go, and we have actually got things coming off the machinery. We've got the plasma machine, the profiles, the cutters, the mills, the lathes, the prefabrication room, jigs and fixtures in place, all the way through to being able to dispatch the goods back to Australia. So that was what we would call operations. And as you remember on that value stream map, that's when we get to run at rate production. In conjunction with, of course, going live, we also didn't forget the fact that we actually had to have technical maintenance plans in place. Part of the requirements when we procured machinery in was that the original equipment manufacturer, or OEM, were required under their contract to tell us exactly what tools we needed, what skills we needed, the sequence, and of course the frequency of maintenance. So we were actually able to train people up of how to actually do that. Some of them were very specific, but of course most of them were very much inspection tasks, which we trained in-house. The other thing we had to our advantage was in the other factory 3 kilometres away that the Indian partner owned, we were able to get their maintainers to come in. And that was really good because they used to have a scheme called, I think it was green coats and blue coats. So they had different skills. And I forget which one was more senior, but I think when you went to blue coat, you could actually be transferred down to this factory. So it created a really good influx of personnel for us. So after opening up and production started, everyone was happy. Still hadn't made money at that point in time, but we made the deadline. We then moved into, of course, measuring, are the processes that we put in place effective? Looking at things like lean manufacturing, design for manufacturing. Is the production line working effectively? Are there any bottlenecks? Are there any defects, any reworks? And really listening to the staff and getting them to feedback. I remember because my trade, I am a maintenance fitter and turner. So I was able to really speak to the people operating the machinery. I got to know them well. And I think once we broke down the cultural barriers, we were able to have a really good conversation, because one of the things that I felt a lot of the people on the production line, they didn't feel confident to speak up. And that took a few months of building up trust that when you speak up in a production environment, it's not a criticism, it's an observation, and it's part of continual improvement. So after really looking at the processes were effective and looking at time and motion, etc., we then moved on to, are we actually complying with the processes? People were coming, people were going. We had multiple shifts, rotational shifts, big learnings in terms of storing materials, semi-finished materials and completed materials, but we had to do that process audit. It's good business, but it also was part of the Rail Safety National Law. Now, that's where everything's going pretty smooth. But then what we had was we had to then move back and look at our support analysis. What we realized was, whilst we had a lot of the machinery was under good contracts for maintenance, we underestimated tooling. So tooling might be a mill cutter, a lathe tool, whatever. When you're starting off a factory and everyone's learning, there were a few incidents when machines would crash, break the tooling. We didn't have any tooling. So if you can imagine, we're in Kolkata, I can go to Sweden, I can go to the United States, or I can go back to the UK and buy tooling. The fastest you were ever going to get it was 1 week away. So we had instances where the production line broke down after a week. So then what we did is we went back to the board, used some of my contingency and bought additional tooling. That's one example. Another example we didn't anticipate, when we switched the laser cutter on and all the machinery was running at the one time, we ended up getting what's called brownouts, and those in India would know what that is. There's not enough power in the system when you turn everything on. And we also had a foundry next door, which was gas electrical. So when they went from gas to electrical, the power came down. So we actually had to go back to the board and ask for additional money. So there was a phasing machine on every single electrical item so it wouldn't brown out. So that probably cost in today's money, probably about 750,000 US dollars. So that was quite expensive, but that was a support change. Now, so that was expensive in its own right. But then you get into then the next piece. Now, I mentioned this before, but the management back in Australia and the Indians were getting a little bit nervous, and they said, gee, we don't want to do all of those production items now. We want to do these other production pieces. So while we were making components for rolling stock, in particular diesel locomotives, they then wanted us to start doing wagon components. So then we needed to get things like machinery that could fold, 10mm plate, and stainless steel plate, it requires a lot of pressure to bend. So that required a change in the machinery and a change in the production line. So that was expensive. So when we talk about engineering change, you can see linked back to specification, it's because the spec changed. From there, we had this is when we got a little bit of tension between the organizations. There were really requirement changes coming in. Requirement changes to the price of materials. So they wanted to change some of the products. There was requirement change to the volume of sales. There was requirement change to the timing. And at the end of the day, they were actually wanting to change some of the original business case. But for those of you who work in physical assets, if you're building an entire plant to suit a business case and you're only a couple of months into production and they change that business case, wow, it gets quite expensive, complex, risk is introduced, costs go up, performance goes down. And this is when I suppose the joint venture, they were starting to argue and have a few debates amongst themselves. These are the things that unfortunately happen. But what I wanted to do, at least in this model here, was just walk you through how the value map that I did from left to right, from business case to full production, this model sitting amongst it, it enabled me as production manager, I was production manager, but program manager, to remind people, especially the board, you might think we're at operations and maintenance, but if we haven't even finished the support analysis on a requirements change that you've just made, you cannot expect us to start making money. So between this model and that value stream map, it actually protected us a lot of time and our stakeholders, because of course they wanted money and profit. At the end of the day, we couldn't do that because we weren't set up for success. In coming back to this model here, and you've probably already seen it and probably understand it, but as you go through this, that whole premise of planning to do something, doing it, checking it, and acting on it is so important. One of the things that I took away from this project in particular was when you're checking things, you're not just checking that you've achieved the plan or you've executed the plan, you also have to check it back against the business case or the intent. And when you get to the act piece, that becomes even more challenging, because you've got to have an attitude and an appetite of the board who oversee this to do something different. I'm really pleased to say that throughout this process, at least those working within the physical assets and on the production line, it was a really healthy culture. Everyone worked well together. All of us Australians and the Indians got on well. We, higher degree of respect there. But again, I think it's fair to say most organisations spend their time in the doing. Second to that, they spend their time planning. If you're lucky, you do some checking. But of course, acting or change is always the hardest. So if I look at this model here and come back again, there's your planning piece up front, that systems engineering approach. From there, you're actually doing the doing. So we actually start production up. but that's all the work to get from the plan to product realization. From there, always making sure that you're checking, going through and having the ability to measure, but also the ability, and this is the painful part for the board, was of course to act sometimes and to change what we were doing. So that was just a walkthrough of that model. So look, got a couple more screens here, but that capability delivery model, plan, do, check and act, also provided me the ability to provide meaningful dashboards. As you can see, those photos down the bottom right-hand side, that's some of the machinery and how it looked at the end there. We were able to link all of those milestones onto a dashboard. We were able to report red, amber or green. And if something was red, it wasn't frowned upon. If it was red, it was really a case of, well, what are we going to do to get it back to green? So we started to really use the metrics and reporting to drive outcomes, support good behavior, and it really changed the culture of how we did things. And as you can see down the left hand there, it might be a bit small, and I'll share this presentation with Professor Pai afterwards. We had the product at the top, we had people, process, parts, plant, risk and opportunity. And that was plastered all the way around in all the different offices on the production line. We would go and update that every month, and people felt part of the process and also part of the solution. Another key part to the entire thing was introducing what we would call an integrated management system. Before I took on the role as program manager for this company in Australia, I was an IMS manager. So it was really of great benefit that I could take some of the skills and learnings, and we actually built this up together. And down the left-hand side, you can see whether it was documentation, whether it was the factory layout, all the way through the various workflows, what was our strategy, different materials, the organizational structure, you name it, we would put it onto this one little, I made a little intranet, and we had kiosk computers throughout the plant and also in the office, but anyone could go there and look at this. It was in English and Bengali, not in Hindi, but it actually had a conversion there. So that was really important for us, because then people had ultimate visibility, ultimate transparency, and when we made a decision, everyone realized the decision could only be made about the outcome. So this had, of course, full change management in support of it. So from here, really, my takeout here, and there's me opening up the plasma machine with the coconut, and I was very privileged to do that. It was great celebrations and everything. But for me, even though I've done the ISO committee and knows I do work in the Asset Management Council, it's not until you actually get out there and use some of these models in implementing something from an asset management approach. My takeouts have certainly been, and my learnings were certainly, it aligns stakeholders to the important things without, of course, forgetting the urgent things. It supports change management and the management of change. And for those, incidentally, the latest version of ISO 55001 has both, so change planning and the management of change. Confidence to speak up. That was probably my most proudest part, was that it didn't matter if someone was a fettler, a welder, working on the floor, working in the office, overhead, whatever, they could speak up and not feel ashamed or threatened to do so. Freedom within a framework is also important. Just because we have procedures and work instructions and we have a production line, people can still make discretionary changes within those processes. And if it works, they would report them back and they would become the new way of doing things. Everyone has a part to play. I think that at first it was very much around executive, director, supervisor, worker. But at the end of the day, everyone was accountable for something, and together we got things done. Focuses on the outcome. Again, that was that value stream map to say that we have to get to full production run, but we also know to get to the outcome, we've got to stop thinking about what we're producing versus the why and how we're actually doing it. Life cycle thinking became a key part, and it also enabled us to do not just the costing, but the management. So when we would go out and procure either a machine, a material, or a consumable, we would actually assess it. Well, what does that actually cost us when we introduce that into this organization? It's not just the buying of a machinery, it's how we support it through its life. A no blame culture. Of course, we had to abide by national safety law from Australia in here at Kolkata. So that also meant adopting a process where I introduced a very simple checklist. Everyone, when they started the shift, would look up, look down, and look across and identify hazards. And we adopted what was called You Take 5. So the safety culture also helped us build a good asset management culture. And at the end of the day, as I like to say, it can be fun. I had so much fun over there. And although it's been 10 years, I do look forward to returning. But look, that really brings me to the end of this presentation. As I said, I haven't told this story before in public. That's why I've kept the names quiet of who the joint venture was. But I just wanted to share with you a personal experience that, forget the academics of asset management. You're all doing asset management now. You can leverage whatever it might be, the Asset Management Society of India, your models, Global Forum models, Asset Management Council models. Doesn't matter what the model is, it's how you actually apply it. So, thank you. That was, oh, you've got the book. You got the book.
Yeah.
But look,
yeah. Glenn sent me this.
No, wonderful, wonderful. It took us 6 years to write that book, and a lot of stories in there. But again, again thank you for the opportunity to share my personal story in this. Asset management does not have to be hard. It can just align people. And yeah, I'll open up to any questions, comments, criticisms, or anything that you might have this morning, or sorry, it's now afternoon there in India. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kher, for that insightful presentation. We now open the floor for Q&A session. You can please type your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask. And we can address as many as we can in the next 10 minutes.
No, thank you very much, Rama. I think Gopi is going to ask a simple question, I hope, or a comment.
No, that's right. I think, no, thank you very much sharing that one. I think it is really valuable because sometimes, it is difficult from the cultural aspects. And that is one thing. What you have done, I think that can be useful for other organizations. Always there is a mental barrier that related to these joint ventures and those different cultures. And sometimes in India, I think I'm interested to know how you did that one, speak up. Because sometimes, in Indian perspective, there are expressed and also implied. But if you look into, in Australia, it is explicit. I mean, expressed that what you need to do, what is your one. And then when you have so many different stakeholders, how you manage the RESI part, the responsibility, because this is one where this is very interesting, because the challenge is that in terms of that culture aspects, and also in terms of the responsibility and the interfaces. So can you please share that, because there is something which is not written in many of the books.
No, there's not. I think I'll answer it from two perspectives. One perspective was, and I said this to every person that traveled from Australia to India, the first time you go there, look and listen. The second time you go there, look and listen. The third time, then you can start asking questions, because until they see your face a few times, you are just another Aussie flying in and out. Now, when I was probably 6 months into the journey, and I said to my wife, I'm going to do something really radical here. I'm going to do something different. I've got to get these people together. So what I did, and this is true story, I went to a supermarket. I bought a cricket bat. My wife helped me take all the stickers off the cricket bat, and I put 4 stickers on it. I put the Indian flag, the Australian flag, my Australian company, and the Indian company onto the cricket bat. I went in, and there's a funny story behind this, but I actually went in there, and after work, because usually we finish work at about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and when they bring the mosquitoes out and they're blowing all the steam around. And I went downstairs behind the foundry, took a ball down there, and I must have had about 50 kids. We were all playing French cricket together out the back, and it was probably just a magical moment. And I remember the managing director of that organisation, Ramesh, he looked out the window and he didn't say anything, but 2 days later he goes, I think you might have just fixed a relationship we needed to fix, because at the end of the day, I'm a visitor there and so are the rest of Australians, and they didn't understand how to behave because they were always trying to get profit. But you can't get profit without understanding value, and to get value, you also have to understand people's value. And it was probably, Gopi and everyone, it was probably a monumental moment for me, because I realized after I did that job, I wanted to get into change and asset management in a different way, not just doing programs and projects. And that was a key one. But a funny story just on that. My driver, Banu, picks me up at Kolkata Airport. So it was just when they changed airports. And I come down through the escalator. And as I did, the cricket bat had to be handed to me because I'm not allowed to take it on a plane. So what I did was, because I once went and watched the Kolkata Knight Riders play, great team, I put the cricket bat under my arm and I walked out the front to meet my driver. And I had all these people come around wanting me to sign things, and I realized they must have thought I was an Australian cricket player. So that was my 15 minutes of fame. But in all seriousness, Gopi, it's really important, if you can align to the value of what you're doing and live and breathe the values that you say you're going to do. It's hard sometimes. I spent many nights I didn't stay in a hotel there. I stayed on the compound there every time I visited, which is, I think it was 18 visits I did over that 3-year period. I would always stay on site. I always walked the walk. I didn't just talk the talk, and that went a long way. So again, there's many different ways you can do that, but if you align to the values of the organization, the value of what you're trying to do, but understand each other's values, it's not hard. Having a conversation, I really enjoyed my time over there. And I think, in all honesty, and I've worked around the world in many countries, I think India, to me, are the easiest ones to communicate and work with, because you understand value. You just do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. And second question is that Howrah was one of the places where they could have done very accurate toolings and other things. Did you thought that could have been your plan B if there were some delays and you were stuck?
I think plan B was actually when I went out to one of the, I should tell you, it was Tata. They also had an engineering tooling division that made the tooling. I was actually talking to them. I used to meet them sometimes for coffee and tea in Kolkata. And I'd say to them, if we can't do this, do you have accurate machinery that we could start doing some of the pilot runs? And they said yes. So that was my plan B. But the only reason they were saying yes to me, because they knew that I was trying to set them up for success, but they needed to work with me for the outcome. And I think that was the other thing. I said, you're not selling me a piece of machinery. You're selling me the means to produce this railway component. And that was also a change of discussion with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, what was that unique situation which was maybe challenging, and how did you overcome that?
I think one of the challenging ones for me was there was an incident in the factory where a person injured themselves, and they weren't a direct employee. They actually came through and they had a very nasty accident with their arm. Myself, I was a program director, and Greg, the CEO, we wanted to go and visit that person and their family and just say how sorry we were that it happened. But we were told that we couldn't do that under the sort of the circumstances, because it might be seen as we were trying to suppress things. And that was a reality, a little bit disappointing for me, but challenge for me after that point, Professor Pai, was I made sure safety was the front of everything, and no excuses at all. So I was very firm after that, and even on our Australians, and I said, no way, you are to follow every single rule and we will have zero harm. So that was probably the safety one was my most challenging.
Yeah, I think you were right, Martin, in terms of whether the contractor, subcontractor, those things, that sometimes there is a gray area. and the leaders need to stand the lesson. Whoever is responsible, I take the responsibility for that. It's not easy. Sometimes it costs, but it pays back a lot. That is also my realization. So whatever you have told, true leaders, they stand for that one. And sometimes the legal aspects and in terms of those, the boundaries, that makes it a little bit difficult and sometimes frustrating. But I mean, let us try to be honest that one accident, one injury, one death is enough. We need to try to reduce that. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I think also too, just on that, Gopi, when you talk about laws, rules and compliance, to me, if people are focused on that and not outcomes, it'll always be about that. The other big thing, and this applied to my chief executive, because he paid me a compliment actually before he left the company. He said, you were able to get people to understand the difference between a responsibility and accountability. So that was another thing when after that project, I thought, wow, I want to do something different, because, and again, it's just a matter of shutting up, listening, understanding, respecting, because you'll find that the other side has got the same view, but just expressing it differently. I think that's really key, active listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there are
So do
other
we have
questions.
Oh no, there's another a hand up there.
Yeah, Professor Uday Kumar.
Yes, good morning. And sorry, it's a good morning everywhere. And thanks a lot, Martin, for sharing your experience how we can take this asset management journey. And I was listening, you talked about support change when you are changing the support. And what is happening now? Things are changing too fast nowadays, and too many new things are coming. And there are two words like usually we use, what we call best available technology for the operation you have. And most suitable technology for my case. I cannot use everything available in the market. Did you face any investment issues and while applying this?
Look, that's a big one, but part of it, having spent 7 years in the ISO committee, just to let you know that every single management system standard on earth now has planning for change, which is in section 5, and the management of change in section 8. It didn't have plan for change. But I think what you need to do in any organization is understand the context, because if you've got IT equipment, you know it's going to change quickly. But if you've got other slow moving things, you have to evaluate that yourselves. But I think it's really important that the organization moves away from just looking at a 1 year view of the world with budget and looks at really a longer term forecast of what you're trying to deliver. The world is moving fast. I mean, I don't know if you heard it in India, but in Australia, we had a big wipeout of IT yesterday due to a software upgrade, and every plane ground to a halt. It all stopped. Everything in Australia and New Zealand stopped. So the world is moving fast. It can be addressed, I suppose, through the eyes of risk. But you're right. There's no one answer to it other than to say that a management system standard now has adopted planning for change, because an organization's leadership should also be looking at what does it do to the organization when it wants to move from one direction to another. Typically, they just say, we're doing that now and expect the organization to change. You can't, it's not sustainable. So that's a leadership question, I believe.
Yes, there were two things actually. You talked about the process monitoring, but I was looking at something like a performance monitoring.
Yep.
When you come to the operation and maintenance, what is which metrics, and because you should have a clear link and effect model. If I don't integrate new technology,
so
when performance is
so one of our streams was information technology. Now, when the IT person came, he came from another area of Kolkata. He didn't know anyone. So what I did was I said, we're going to go around and visit every stakeholder you're going to serve. And I said, what is your uptime requirements? What is your spare parts requirements? How many printers do you need? I helped him quantify that full list. And we said, what turnaround do you want if something goes wrong? And they said, we want 24/7 support. I said, really? You want that for a factory that if the IT system goes down, you can still operate. By the end of the day, we had done an internal contract between IT and all the areas of the factory. He had a budget, and when anyone asked for something above that budget or against the service level agreement, they had to pay additional money, because that then got people thinking about both lead indicators and lag indicators. It also taught people that in a factory, you have an internal customer and an internal supplier. Go out, speak to them, and quantify what the needs are. Because if I hadn't have done that with him, I know every time there would have been an IT outage, he would have been slammed day in and day out and wouldn't have been able to support it. He would have probably died of stress.
Yeah, one more thing, actually, I have noticed my working here. What is leading indicators and lagging indicators? What is leading for the top management is lagging for the people on the shop floor. The same
Yes.
indicators. changing the
Yes and no,
Yes.
but really a
Yeah.
lag indicator really is measuring what you say you're going to do. A lead indicator is getting to the outcome you set out to achieve.
Yeah.
And they're both mutually supportive, but I would suggest, and you already know this from your question, getting the right people in the room to understand what you define as a lead indicator, because a strategic asset management plan is your lead, and your asset management plan bottom up is your lag, and your asset management objectives in the middle of them link the two together, and that's your asset management framework.
Actually, I was coming to your requirements management, actually, requirement change and requirement change management. When you come with the leading indicators with performance monitoring, so you have to look into the requirements management. What is your requirements? How you are managing? Then requirement change. When new technology comes in, new customers, new interface, then your this leading indicator has to deal with these lag indicators.
So when you're going out to market, we need to be very careful. We understand, are you going to market with a requirement or going to market with a specification? If you go with a specification, you're determining what the fit, form, and function is. That's it. You go to market with a requirement, you can actually build in your lead indicators into that, because you're setting what are the goals of the organization. But there's a time to do either one, and it comes down to assurance and trust when you go to market with a outcome, because it's harder to actually, because sometimes you don't know what you're asking for because you're not really sure, which confuses the marketplace and can actually bring in additional cost.
It's interesting. Just some of my reflections were there. Thanks a lot. Very interesting.
No, thank you. I mean, great questions, and it's just, very good questions. Very good questions. Thank you.
Sir, I hope there are no more questions. Can we conclude, sir?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I thank everyone. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, how can we improve the safety issues by incorporating artificial intelligence into this contest?
I think the important thing with artificial intelligence, machine learning, or anything like that is it is a tool to support an outcome. It is not the outcome itself. If you understand the question and you can get it to AI, it can be a great tool. I've had a lot of practice with that recently with the World Partners. We use that tool to test things. But you need to be careful that, remember, artificial intelligence or ChatGPT is only a knowledge repository. True AI will come soon, and that's when you need to have the inputs for it to give you an adequate answer. But please, at this point in time, see it as a tool, not a full capability.
Okay, so it's all about getting the real data of the assets, right? So what about implementing sensors and getting the data maybe with a high interval of maybe 5 seconds or 5 minutes or 10 minutes and passing this data in the cloud? Whenever we have the sufficient data, can we go for an analysis on whether the particular asset have to go for a maintenance or like have to be tested in a, like it's like a predictive management can we do with implementing sensors and collecting the data and analyzing by using any of the AI methodologies?
Look, you can. And I remember seeing it was actually at an asset management council forum probably 10 years ago. they were using what's called noise indicators. So when data would come through, any spike and change of a pattern of data, they would say that there's a potential failure. So I don't know if everyone here is familiar with what's called CF intervals. So it's the condition and the failure interval when you're doing what's called failure modes effects criticality analysis. You could use AI to actually determine what your CF interval is between. C means when does it look like it may start to fail? F is it has failed. You could use AI there, but you got to remember too, AI or any data is only as good as understanding the question or the decision you're trying to make. Because I see so many organizations with data lakes, data oceans, they've got millions of rows of data. It costs a lot of money in the cloud, but they don't even know what the question is they're asking. But if you can go back and really understand, Dr. Raj, what is the question and map it down through information back to data, that's the transactional data, versus the subject matter experts who can provide knowledge, combine them together, that's to me a better starting point. You can do SCADA, you can do machine monitoring, remote monitoring. I've seen that, I've seen it work. But really, I see a lot of equipment monitoring, really only reporting when something has failed, not how it is wearing. And I think that's another consideration in future technology.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And once again, for a long life, complex assets, when it goes through, like there are the owners of these assets, there are the operators, there are the maintenance, and the contract changes over a period of time, then the quality of data itself is a challenge, and data many times with the hard data as well as some of the text. There are text even like the mild corrosion or corrosion started, or it is a early stage. So there are the different things, images and the videos and the audios. So once again, what I'm telling, it will require significant time to have a full confidence related to better understanding the condition, and then also the remaining life and the interventions. Right now, that's why the expertise of the people and the knowledge helps to reduce that gap and manage it. But once again, in this, this long life complex assets, I think still it's a long way to go what you are asking for. So Martin, you can correct if I'm wrong.
Well, I don't think there's any right or wrong, but the whole premise is that, again, you've got to know what you're measuring and how you're measuring it. There's the other thing too, is you should also understand what is your maintenance strategy. Am I going to run to failure? Am I going to do a hard time change out? Am I going to do condition monitoring on cycle, on time? You could use different tactics on maintenance depending on the criticality of the asset itself. And I think sometimes people forget that it doesn't always have to be done at a particular time. It can be done on condition, but it can also sometimes be more economical to take the thing out and replace it, doing a hard time replacement if you're doing a possession. So this is something that I would appeal organizations invest in reliability management, reliability engineering. You don't have to be a reliability engineer, but if you know someone who does get it, you can be creating reliability block diagrams against your systems, understand where your criticality is, because then that's when AI can actually, the noise signature of data coming from machines can really help you, because you know that, wow, there's no redundancy here. If that machine fails, so does everything else, and that costs money. Reliability linked to an outcome, say an asset management objective, is another solid way of influencing funding through your asset and service or asset management plan. So all this asset management from the 10 years ago, I was trying to do this in the example I gave today, to really bring in maintenance and all these things through your asset management plan. That is really where organizations can benefit from this whole discussion.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the valuable suggestion.
Thank you.
So do we conclude?
Yep. I think we'll come to the end of it, hopefully. Yeah.
No, well, look, again, it's been an honor and a privilege to share that with you. Like I said, I've never shared that publicly with anyone before, that particular journey. It was only when Gopi and I were in Sydney a year ago, and we just happened to realize we had a common interest in a particular area of India. I thought, wow, I'm going to one day talk about this. So I thank you very much for allowing me to do that today. And I really thank you for those questions. And Professor Pai, I will send you through this slide deck immediately after today.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
It was well received, and it will be useful for what the MC is trying to achieve. Uday is coming from the Swedish background, a lot of things happening there. The Australian team through the Asset Management Council is also supporting. And what we are trying to do is to bring all these heavy hitters to be involved, engaged, and realize value from these knowledges. Thank you.
No, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend in India and in Australia. Have a pleasant evening.
Yeah, same to you. And
Thank you.
I request Ramya to thank you, Gopi, and thank you, Professor Uday Kumar, for the insight questions and answers from Martin.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Ramya,
Yes, yes, sir.
Bye.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. The session was truly insightful for me as well. The first of a kind for me too. Thank you, Mr. K, for that insightful presentation. And to conclude today's session, I would like to invite Dr. Binu KG, Treasurer of AMSI, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Well, I believe the thanks are already being said. Anyway, I mean, let me just go through it. Good afternoon, everyone. As we come to the close of this enlightening session, it is my privilege to extend a vote of thanks on behalf of the Asset Management Society India. Firstly, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Mr. Mr. Martin Kerr, for his outstanding presentation. Your insights on applying asset management to support joint ventures in India based on your past experiences with a joint venture in Calcutta were truly illuminating and have provided us with much to ponder and implement in our practices. In your presentation, Mr. Kerr, you spoke in detail about your interventions in India, beginning with the visual roadmap, developing the guiding principles, and you provided us with a detailed walkthrough on the capability delivery model with focus on integrating the Plan, Do, Check, Act, the PDCA framework. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us, Mr. Kerr. I would also like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our President, Professor Raghuveer Pai, for his inspiring welcome address, and to Colonel Sunil Yadav for the comprehensive introduction of our speaker. A special thank you to all our attendees for your participation and the engaging questions during the Q&A session. Your active involvement is what makes these webinars successful and useful. Thank you once again, and we look forward to your support and participation in our future webinars. Have a great day ahead. Over to you, MC.
Thank you, Dr. Binu, for delivering the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Binu, sir. So with that, we come to the end of today's webinar. We hope you found the session very informative and engaging. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, Ramya, for doing the Master of Ceremonies. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.